It's strange how some of the best parts of Dutch pub culture aren't the beers, the music, or even the old wooden interiors. It's the snacks, the kind of bites that showed up on tables long before anyone asked for them, the ones you'd smell before you even stepped inside. And today, most people don't even realize how many of those classics have quietly disappeared, or survive only in the memories of true Dutch pubgoers. Because if you ever walked into a real bruin cafe, the kind where the walls almost tell their own stories, you know exactly what I'm talking about. These weren't just snacks, they were traditions. Tiny rituals wrapped in breading, mustard, spice, or a crispy fryer basket. Some were legendary, some were questionable, and some were so uniquely Dutch that even locals argue about which ones were the best. But here's the thing, not all of them made it to the present day. A lot of those old school bites faded out when modern cafes started polishing their menus. Some survived only in small villages, and a few became the kind of nostalgic treasures that instantly tell you whether someone grew up in the true Dutch pub era. So today, we're diving into 15 old pub snacks only true Dutch people remember. The forgotten hits, the ones that defined nights out, and the ones you'd never find unless you lived through that golden age of Dutch cafes. And trust me, the first one might be obvious, but the deeper we go, the more surprising and oddly legendary these snacks get. Let's start with the one that every Dutch person swears they could recognize by smell alone. Everyone knew the sound before the plate even hit the table. That sharp crackle from the kitchen that meant one thing: Bitterballen were on the way. These golden molten spheres weren't just snacks. They were practically a national treasure. Hot, crispy, and filled with that mysterious ragu mixture nobody outside the kitchen ever fully understood. And honestly, most people didn't want to know. Part of the magic was the mystery. But what a lot of people forget is just how different they used to be. Older pubgoers swear the ragu had a deeper flavor back then, richer, thicker, almost smoky, because some cafes used their own homemade recipes. A few bars guarded them like secrets. There were even rumors that certain pubs mixed tiny splashes of their own gravy batches into the filling, giving each place its signature taste. Nothing was official, but everyone had their favorite spot. And then came the Kroketten, the Bitterball's bigger, bolder cousin. Same ragout-style core, but stretched into a crisp log that hit different after a drink or two. Some cafes served them on soft white rolls, turning a simple snack into a full-on ritual. Others sliced them open and slathered them with mustard, letting the steam roll out like a warning to anyone about to burn their tongue. These two snacks were the backbone of every Borrel table. So iconic that newer pubs still copy them, even if the modern versions never quite capture that old-school flavor. But as legendary as they were only the beginning. Because once you took that first crunchy bite, there was always something waiting on the side that completed the entire experience. And it wasn't what you'd expect. Right next to the fryer classics sat something far simpler, but somehow just as essential. A wooden board, a little too worn around the edges, stacked with cubes of cheese so salty and sharp they could snap you awake faster than the first sip of beer. Kaassoufflés weren't fancy, but they were dependable. Young cheese, old cheese, sometimes a mix, always paired with that tiny dish of mustard that felt like it had been sitting there since the cafe opened in the 60s. And then came the sausage. Not just any sausage, Ossenworst, cold, smooth, smoky, sliced so thin the edges curled slightly. A lot of people today don't realize how common it was in old pubs. It wasn't some specialty item. It was just there, part of the culture. And if you were lucky, the board came with a few slices of leverwurst, a soft liver sausage that only true locals appreciated. Outsiders didn't always get it, but regulars ordered it without thinking. The whole setup was simple, but the vibe was unmistakable. This was the original borrelplank, long before cafes tried turning it into something gourmet. No marble boards, no Instagram-ready layouts, just cheese, sausage, mustard, and maybe a few pickles rolling around at the edge of the plate like they'd escaped from somewhere else. And ironically, those plain, no-nonsense bites often disappeared faster than the hot snacks. Because as good as Bitterballen were, you couldn't ignore how quickly a slice of Ossenworst vanished when people were a few drinks in. But things didn't stay simple for long, because as Dutch pubs evolved and new flavors started influencing the bar scene, something much hotter entered the picture. And once it showed up, everything on the table changed. At some point, Dutch pubs decided that cheese and sausage weren't enough anymore. People wanted something with a kick, something that could cut through the beer haze and hit you with real flavor. And that's when Vlammetjes arrived. These tiny, fiery rolls didn't look like much, but one bite told you exactly why they became legends. Thin pastry on the outside, molten spicy meat on the inside. Just enough heat to wake you up, but not enough to send you running for water. The kind of snack you grabbed in pairs, because taking only one felt like a mistake. What most people didn't realize was how much these little rolls were inspired by the Indonesian and Surinamese flavors woven into Dutch food culture. That fusion made them different from anything else on the table. And suddenly, every pub wanted their own version. Some made them mild and peppery. Others served them so sharp that your tongue tingled for a full minute. They became a kind of secret test. If you could handle the heat, you earned a nod from the regulars, one of those silent approvals old cafes were known for. And if you dipped them in a heavy garlic sauce or sweet chili, even better. Every friend group had that one person who claimed they could eat a whole plate without blinking, even though everyone knew they'd start sweating halfway through. But Vlammetjes weren't alone, because around the same time they were heating up the pub scene, another wave of snacks started popping out of the fryer, bigger, bolder, and way more mysterious. Some of them became icons, others faded into nostalgia, but all of them left their mark on the Dutch pub era. Once pubs realized fried snacks were basically crowd control, they went all in. And that's when the real heavy hitters showed up, starting with the Frikandel. Long, skinless, and impossible to explain to anyone outside the Netherlands, it became a quiet favorite in the corner cafes. Not fancy, not complicated, just straight comfort. Some pubs served it plain, others drowned it in curry ketchup and mayo, creating a messy masterpiece you had to eat fast before the sauces slid off the top. But the Frikandel was only the warm-up act, because then came the Indonesian-inspired giants, the Bamischijf and Nasi. Crispy discs filled with noodles or rice, hot, heavy, and weirdly addictive. They didn't look like anything else on the table, but one bite told you exactly why they spread across pubs in the 80s and 90s. They were different, they were filling, and they tasted like the kind of comfort food that hit perfectly after midnight. There was always a bit of mystery around them too. Some pubs claimed they made their own batches. Others had secret suppliers. And rumors suggest certain cafes added little twists, extra spice, a splash of soy, even bits of chicken, to give theirs a signature flavor. Nothing confirmed, but it kept people guessing, and that was part of the fun. These weren't elegant snacks, they were survival snacks, the kind you ordered when you needed something solid before the next round. And for a while, they ruled every pub fryer in the country. But as iconic as they were, they didn't hold the spotlight alone, because just a few feet away, on the colder side of the borrelplank, something very different was waiting. Something older, saltier, and strictly for the die-hard regulars. Not everything in the old Dutch pubs came sizzling out of a fryer. Some of the most iconic snacks were the ones that hit the table ice cold. and only the true regulars ever appreciated them. The first was Ossenworst, but not the soft, packaged version you see today. Old pubs served it raw, smoky, and sliced so thin the edges curled like tiny waves. One bite, and you understood why it earned its place next to the bigger snacks. It wasn't flashy, but it had a depth that made people order it again and again. And right next to it, herring. Yes, the same pickled herring you see on Dutch streets today. But in old cafes, it played a different role. It wasn't a tourist food. It wasn't a novelty. It was a real Borrel snack, salty, tender, and almost refreshing with a cold beer. Some bars served it with onions, others didn't. But everyone agreed it hit harder after a couple of drinks. It was the ultimate love it or leave it snack, and the regulars loved it. Then came the Zure Bom, the giant sour pickle that was practically a rite of passage. You didn't eat it to be fancy. You ate it because it cut through everything: the beer, the smoke, the late-night hunger. Some cafes kept huge jars behind the bar, the kind you could spot from across the room. If you ever saw someone pull out a Zure Bom with bare hands and hand it over like it was the most normal thing in the world, congratulations, you witnessed peak Dutch pub culture. These cold snacks didn't look dramatic, but they carried a kind of quiet legacy. They belonged to the regulars, the people who knew the bartender by name and never needed a menu. And while modern pubs lean more toward polished platters and curated boards, these classics still trigger instant nostalgia for anyone who grew up in the real brew and cafe era. But as much as the cold snacks had history, the pubs weren't done surprising people. Because scattered across tables, tucked into corners, and sometimes served for free, there was another category of snacks that defined the old days: tiny, crunchy, and dangerously addictive. And once you tried them, you never forgot them. Before fancy menus and curated borrelplank took over, Dutch pubs had something much simpler and way more chaotic: endless bowls of borrelnoten and pindas. These weren't side dishes. These were survival tools. You'd sit down, order a drink, and before you even touched the glass, a small bowl of coated peanuts magically appeared. Sweet, salty, spicy. No two pubs used the same mix, and that was part of the charm. Some cafes swore by the crunchy, orange-coated borrelnoten. Others favored the plain salted peanuts that somehow tasted better in a smoky pub than they ever did at home. And then there were the places where the nuts were extra spicy, the kind that made you keep drinking because your mouth wouldn't stop tingling. You didn't question it. You just grabbed another handful. But the legendary part wasn't the taste, it was the tradition. Back then, a lot of bars didn't charge for these snacks at all. They were simply placed on tables like an unspoken contract. You drink, we feed you just enough to keep you drinking. And everyone accepted the deal without saying a word. Of course, this system had its quirks. Everyone knew at least one person who treated the free bowls like an all-you-can-eat buffet. And if a bar was packed, you'd see entire groups hovering protectively over their snack bowls, as if someone might swoop in and steal them. It was ridiculous, but also very, very Dutch. These tiny bites didn't get the spotlight the warm snacks did, but they shaped the atmosphere in a way nothing else could. They were part of the background noise of old pubs. The crunching, the grabbing, the hand reaching across the table before asking. It created a kind of shared moment between strangers and friends alike. But just when you thought the pub had shown you everything, the bartender would step out from behind the counter with something warm, something richer, heavier, and unmistakably old school. Because there were a few snacks that weren't just served, they were introduced. And that's when the real classics made their comeback. Every old Dutch pub had a moment when the atmosphere shifted. The chatter softened, the music dipped just a little, and the bartender walked out holding something that instantly made the regulars sit up straighter. It was never fancy, never dramatic, just warm, simple food that somehow tasted better in a smoky cafe than it ever did anywhere else. The first was Grillworst, not the grocery store version, but the pub-style kind that came out warm, sliced thick, with steam rising the moment it hit the plate. The edges were crispy, the inside soft and savory, and some cafes even served a version stuffed with cheese that stretched like a dare. It was the kind of snack you only needed one bite of before the entire table leaned in to sample it. Then there was the gehaktbal, brewed, the bar meatball. Calling it a meatball doesn't do it justice. This thing was huge, dense, glazed with gravy so rich it clung to your fingers. And every bar claimed theirs was the best. In fact, rumors suggest some pubs used old family recipes, passed down through multiple owners, creating local legends that regulars still talk about years later. Whether that was true or just bar talk, nobody really knows. But it definitely added to the mystique. And right next to those heavy hitters, you'd often find satiches, tiny skewers of chicken coated in thick peanut sauce that smelled like comfort in its purest form. They weren't fancy, they weren't big, but they hit exactly the spot you didn't know you had. Some pubs served them with a sprinkle of fried onions, others kept them simple, but every version carried that warm, slightly sweet, slightly smoky flavor that made them disappear within minutes. These were the snacks that only the older pubs bothered with, the ones that felt homemade even when they weren't. They carried a kind of soul, a sense of tradition, as if every bite was a nod to the decades of regulars who came before you. But even these warm favorites weren't the end of the story. Because hidden in the fryer baskets, tucked between the classics, were a few snacks that defined a whole generation, light, gooey, and unforgettable. And once those hit the table, nobody held back. By the time you'd reached this part of the table, you already knew the classics. But then came the snacks that felt almost indulgent, the ones that had a quiet cult following among true Dutch pub goers. Take the Kaassoufflé, for instance. Golden on the outside, molten cheese on the inside, and oddly satisfying after a few drinks. It wasn't fancy, but it carried a kind of warm comfort you didn't get from the heavier meat snacks. Then there was the Smulrol, a spiced, deep-fried meat roll that vanished from most modern menus. Its flavor was subtle, almost nostalgic, reminding older patrons of late nights in cafes they probably hadn't thought about in years. Some pubs served it with mustard, others left it plain, but everyone agreed. One bite, and you were hooked. And finally, the humble toastie. Thin toasted sandwiches with simple fillings like cheese and ham, sometimes slathered with mustard or a little ketchup. Today, you might roll your eyes, but back then, they were perfect. Quick, warm, filling, and easy to eat while leaning against the bar, chatting with friends. They were comfort food in miniature form, the kind of snack that made a pub feel like home even on a crowded Friday night. These smaller, less flashy snacks didn't dominate the fryer or the borrelplank, but they had a secret power. They were the quiet stars, the ones that lingered in memory long after the cafe lights went out. And while many of them have faded from modern menus, anyone who grew up in the true Dutch pub era remembers exactly how they tasted and exactly where to get them, if you're lucky. And just like that, we've traveled through decades of Dutch pub history, one bite at a time. Looking back at these 15 snacks, it's easy to see that Dutch pubs weren't just about beer. They were about experience. Every bite tells a story. Bitterballen and Kroketten weren't just fried delights. They were part of a ritual, a shared language among friends and strangers alike. Kaassoufflé, Ossenworst, and Leverworst carried decades of tradition on a single wooden board, connecting generations of pub-goers who understood that some things were meant to be eaten slowly, with conversation flowing around them. The spicy hits, like Vlammetjes, reminded patrons that pubs weren't afraid to experiment. They brought heat, excitement, and sometimes a little chaos to the table, keeping everyone alert and laughing. Meanwhile, the Friar heavyweights, Frikandel, Bamischijf, and Kaassoufflé, showed that comfort could be crispy, hot, and endlessly satisfying. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. By joining the dear old Holland family, you'll be the first to discover more hidden traditions, nostalgic foods, old school pub secrets, and cultural treasures that many people have forgotten. Trust me, you don't want to miss the next journey into the heart of Dutch history and flavor. And while you're at it, leave a comment below. Which of these snacks do you remember, or which one do you wish you could try today? I love hearing your stories. It's how we keep these old traditions alive. So don't just watch, join us. Hit subscribe, grab a snack, or maybe a bitterball. And let's keep exploring the quirky, fascinating, and delicious world of Dutch culture together. Because in dear old Holland, every bite has a story, and every story deserves to be remembered.